So good news for those Indians who are stranded in the region of Sumy, that the shelling will stop and they'll be able to move out of there. But those multiple logistical problems continue to persist, because many of them have to use their own means to get to those safe zones. Now, amid the entire humanitarian crisis, Prime Minister Narendra Modi is all set to hold talks with both the warring sides. Top government sources have told CNN News 18 that Prime Minister Narendra Modi will engage in a conversation with both Ukrainian President Zelensky as well as Russian President Vladimir Putin. Now, amid pressure from the West and Indian allies to take a definite stance on the war, India has refrained from doing so, choosing to abstain from all votes at multiple international forums when it comes to those resolutions on Russian aggression in Ukraine. So the focus of the Indian government, as that has been put out by Prime Minister Narendra Modi time and again, is to evacuate the Indian nationals from the war zone. And that good news is coming in, that be it Kharkiv or Sumy, now Russia has announced a ceasefire, but the establishment of those evacuation corridors is the need of the hour. I'm joined by Maria Shakil on the broadcast, CNN News 18 political editor. Maria, good morning. So Maria, is that the focus of the Modi government, to ensure that those humanitarian corridors are established and maintained after Russia has announced that ceasefire, namely in Kharkiv and Sumy, where Indian nationals continue to be trapped?
Yes, that's right. And humanitarian corridor for evacuation of Indians is the primary concern. Remember, the Russian ceasefire begins at 12:30 p.m. Indian Standard Time in parts of Kyiv, Sumy, Kharkiv, Mariupol. We have been seeing very distressing messages come in from students who are stuck in Sumy. They have been appealing to the government to ensure that there is safe passage for them so that they can reach the neighboring countries from where the evacuation exercise is being undertaken. And now, remember, the Prime Minister has had one round of talks with Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, and there will be another talk that will take place between Prime Minister and Vladimir Putin in a couple of hours from now, is what sources are telling us. That call becomes important also in the backdrop of the appeal that has come from the foreign minister of Ukraine, in which he had reached out to India and a number of countries, telling them that there has to be efforts so that the entire war comes to an end. Now, the primary concern, as we have been saying, of India is to ensure evacuation of its citizens and nationals. And that is the reason why another talk, this is the third talk that will be taking place between Prime Minister Modi and Vladimir Putin in a gap of, in a matter of 10 days. Just a quick recap of what the Ukrainian foreign minister had urged India. What we had said that, Russia should be told to stop this war. Now, in that conversation, remember the Prime Minister, whenever he had spoken to the premiers of both the countries, the message that he had communicated was that there should be diplomacy and dialogue. That is the only way forward to end this war.
Absolutely. Thank you, Maria, for joining us on the broadcast. So that conversation, those two important conversations will be held between Prime Minister Modi and Zelensky, as well as the Prime Minister and Vladimir Putin. And two aspects will be discussed. Number one, the safe evacuation of Indian nationals from the war zone. And Prime Minister Modi once again will reiterate his pitch that there should be talks to achieve a ceasefire, to ensure that all hostilities end on the ground. Remember, Prime Minister Modi said dialogue and diplomacy is the only way forward to achieve any sort of peace. So that pitch will come in from the Prime Minister during his conversations with both the leaders. Now let's get an overview of the geopolitical situation emerging from the war zone. I'm joined by Major General Ashok Kumar, defense analyst on the broadcast, as well as Vishnu Prakash, former diplomat. Ambassador Prakash, I remember you and I were discussing the first ceasefire which the Russian Federation had announced for the southern part of Ukraine in order, as the Russian offensive continued in the southern part of Ukraine, in a strategic offensive to cut off the Black Sea from the rest of Ukraine. Now, that ceasefire only lasted a couple of hours. But as the cost of this war is rising on Vladimir Putin, how do you read this fresh ceasefire coming in, be it Kiev, Mariupol, Kharkiv and Sumy? How do you read that pitch for a ceasefire coming in from the Russian Federation?
Ayushman, greetings. It is really a positive development, because in the midst of the war, in the midst of so much of shelling, for having a ceasefire is something that everybody wanted. And but the challenge would be to hold the ceasefire and not let some untoward incident take place, because while there are the regular armed members of the armed forces on both sides. There are also irregulars in the on the Ukraine side in particular who have taken to arms. There are the inexperienced people. Then there is a talk of some mercenaries coming in, and with the taut nerves, all that you need is one bullet to let lead to panic. But I really hope that this does not happen. President Macron has spoken to, as you were mentioning, spoken to President Putin and President Zelensky. Prime Minister is going to weigh in, and hopefully the nightmare of the Indian students would come to an end. What government of India has done is exemplary under trying circumstances to get 17,000 of its citizens out. Now there are less than 1,500, especially in Sumi, and these kids are certainly distraught. And I really hope that their ODL ends. But more than that, thereafter, one hopes that cooler heads prevail. And as Prime Minister has been encouraging all sides, that they get back to the negotiating table because there is no other alternative.
Absolutely.
Ayushman.
Right. Major General Ashok Kumar, is that a problem when it comes to the announcement of these ceasefires? Because we've seen the Ukrainian side arm civilians and militia groups with rifles and grenades and other armaments. So is that a huge problem? Because as Russian forces enter these cities and it's all urban warfare, any announcement of a ceasefire rests on a knife's edge.
This is absolutely right because the ceasefire cannot be maintained by the single side. Even though the Russia is the one who is on the offensive, and once it has agreed for ceasefire, it is equally important that the Ukrainian forces also honor that kind of commitment. And in any case, besides the regular forces, there have been talks of the number of irregular stakeholders who are also keying in this kind of conflict. And if you see, though the absolute truth is not known because the truth is the first casualty in such kind of conflicts. But
Absolutely.
when it was declared in Mariupol by Russia, the Russian armed forces were supplying the food and other eatables to the Ukrainian population. And there were a number of occasions when the tanks, the armed soldiers are being pushed by the naked hand civilians of Ukraine, and still the other party is trying to hold on and showing a lot of restraint. In such a situation, it is once the Russian troops or the Russian interests are countermanded by the actions of the Ukrainian and anybody else, it is very difficult to hold on the ceasefire. One hopes now, since the ceasefire which has been declared in Sumi, where the Indian stakes are high, we have though done well to start our evacuation of civilians and students well before than any other country, and have already done a lot on that ground. Next 1,500 to 2,000 students who are currently in Sumi, they get a respite. And once the Prime Minister is speaking to Mr. Zelensky as well as Mr. Putin, I'm sure the appropriate word will go to the warring sides, and these guys will be able to come out safely. And then thereafter, since today there is a talk of the third round also, maybe, and again I'm qualifying maybe, these kind of ceasefire offers, these kind of enhanced talks by like Prime Minister Modi, President of France and others, may create better conditions to reach some kind of consensus during third round of talks, because that is very, very critical. It is finally the talks which are going to resolve the problem. Especially at a time when United States of America is trying to fuel the fire by telling Poland to give jets to Ukraine, and in turn it will replace the jets of Poland. Now Poland, I already brought out, is a NATO country since 1999. If the Poland jets are given, which are used by Ukraine against Russia, it will enlarge the conflict. So these kind of actions are not required at this point of time, and all parties, irrespective of their positions, should create conditions for third round of talks to succeed.
Right. So that is the concern coming in with the Ukrainian forces arming so many civilians, and at the same time the West pumping in so many arms into Ukraine, into those key areas of the war zone.